So, feeding bees. I see a couple commercial guys in here, but mainly we're talking about backyard beekeepers feeding bees. Why would you want to feed your bees? When would you want to feed your bees? How you'd want to feed your bees. All that good stuff. All right, let's start by saying that we can feed bees the hard way.
Another roll of raffle tickets?
I don't.
Oh my God.
The first time we sold out of raffle tickets. That's a beautiful thing. I don't know what we're going to do, but maybe you could start cutting tickets in half, and then they can fight over it. All right, so feeding bees. All right, we done over there? Hello, hello. All right, thank you. All right, so feeding bees, we can do it the hard way. And this is my backyard, believe it or not. That is almost 1/4 of an acre of cosmos, zinnias, sunflowers, all kinds of wildflowers. It doesn't look like that now because I found out that's the hard way to feed bees. Because bees have to tap 2 million flowers to make 1 pound of honey. So there's not 2 million flowers in my backyard, so they're going to have a hard time making a pound of honey. Bees visit 50 to 100 flowers on each trip going out of the hive. Now when they go out of the hive to feed, they mainly stick to the same floral source. So if you have your hive in at a farmer's orchard of oranges and the orange trees are in bloom, the bees are going to stick to what's most plentiful. So they're going to go to the orange blossoms. That's how we get orange blossom honey. If they come out of the hive and they see zinnias, all different wildflowers, cosmos, sunflowers, they're going to pick cosmos and then go to another cosmo. And another cosmo, and they're going to do 100 cosmos before they go back to the hive. And then they're going to unload and then go out again, and they might then go to sunflowers, but they'll stick to sunflowers because pollination won't happen if they go from the sunflower to a cosmo. It doesn't work that way. So nature has intended the bees to be selective when they go out on that trip. But they will mix it in the hive. That's how we're getting wildflower honey. So pollen, when they're collecting nectar and pollen, when they're out on these journeys, they actually collect 10 milligrams of pollen on each trip and bring it back to the hive. Now the nectar is their carbohydrate, and the pollen is their protein source. And so bees need both. Just like we need both, they need both. So when we talk about feeding bees, we are either going to be feeding them a carbohydrate or we're going to be feeding them a protein. And mainly we stick to the carbohydrate because that's the goal that's easiest to reach in Florida. Now if you were up north, you might feed pollen patties. But we usually have pollen year-round. Even if the flowers aren't producing a lot of nectar, they're still producing pollen. Even right now, the nectar flow is really low, but you see your bees coming in just covered with white pollen. They're inside those Mexican clovers like crazy right now, and they're just covered with this white pollen. So you can do it the hard way, but you can't plant enough flowers on your yard to sustain your bees. They're foraging 3 to 5 miles around your house to find enough food to survive. So a little combination is good. You know, you can do a little bit. Nectar of the gods. We talked about nectar is one of the food sources for bees. That's their carbohydrate. That bee is on a fake flower. That's not a real flower. My daughter did a science fair project where she was feeding bees and she was putting honey in the center of those fake flowers, and she'd wait for a bee to come to it, and then she'd mark it with a daub of paint. And then she'd time it as soon as it left to see how long it took to come back to that flower. So it was a great science fair project. She went to districts. She got second place in district, but she never went to state with it. So nectar What is nectar? Nectar is water and sugar that's produced by the plants to be a reward for the bees coming to that flower and collecting pollen to take it to the next flower to pollinate that flower. So honey is made out of nectar. Does everybody know how honey's made? Raise your hand if you don't know how honey's made. Quite a few people, okay. So let's go over it real quick. Honey, bees are out collecting nectar. They drink it. It goes into a special stomach called the honey stomach. And it's like a crop in a bird. It's the first stomach. And it combines with enzymes inside that stomach, and the bee flies back to the hive, regurgitates that and feeds it to another bee. It goes inside their honey stomach, mixes with more enzymes, and then that bee regurgitates it into honeycomb, and then they fan it to dry it, to evaporate water from it. Once the water content gets down to 17%, that nectar is now honey. And then they put a cap over the top, a wax cap right over that cell, and we now know that it's no longer nectar, it's honey. So if you see uncapped cells that have a golden liquid inside, you're looking at nectar. If you see the cells that are covered with wax, you're looking at honey. So we want to wait until that entire frame is covered with wax caps before we harvest. Because if we harvest when there's still nectar on that frame, the water content is too high on the nectar and it will ferment. And so you'll make mead, not intentionally. So back to this. So honey is 17% water content. Nectar is said to be 80% water. But that's just an average. That's what everybody uses as their numbers. It all depends on the conditions that we have. A lot of rain, you're going to have more water in your nectar. Drought situations, you're going to have less water in that nectar. So it's going to go as low as 50% and as high as 92%. So those bees have to bring down that water content inside the hive. And so how many people have walked out in their yard and all you can smell is honey? Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. They're fanning that nectar dry, and it makes the whole backyard smell great. So the difference between nectar and honey. Honey is long-term food storage. They're storing it up for wintertime. Bees prefer to eat nectar. So if bees have a choice, flowers and grab nectar and eat it, or grab honey and eat it, they're going to grab the nectar. So at some points during the year, you could set honey out in your yard and not one bee will go to it. You set honey out there this time of year, you'll have every bee crawling over that honey. So there are times when bees don't care about honey. They're looking for nectar. So nectar in the comb, we kind of went over this. This is the uncapped nectar. So you see the liquid inside the cells. And this is very important to recognize when you're going through your hives, because you want to know if your bees are bringing in food and how much food they have in there, and if you need to start feeding your bees. So if your cells are all dry and all your cells are capped in honey, you know that they're not bringing in any nectar and they're feeding off of the reserve of honey. So you better start feeding. If you see nectar inside the uncapped cells, you know that they're finding something somewhere because they haven't finished converting it to honey yet. But you could still need to feed your bees even if you have open cells. So remember that a frame, one deep frame, weighs about 5 pounds if it's covered in nectar front and back, comb top to bottom. Okay, it's about 5 pounds. So you never want your hive to drop below 12 to 18 pounds of nectar. So that's a full-blown hive. If you're just starting a hive, it's going to be different. A nuke, so it's proportional to the hive that you have. But I'm talking about a full-blown hive. You don't want it to drop below that 18 pounds of nectar. So if you have 3 frames, front and back, of open nectar, you're fine. your hive is doing okay. If it drops below that, you're going to want to start to feed. All right, so shallows, if you're looking at supers, keep in mind that that frame weighs between 2 and 3 pounds. So start doing the math to figure out if your bees need to be fed because of starvation. So there's a couple reasons why you'd feed your bees. One is because your bees are starving, they're not finding enough to eat. Or there's situations where you're feeding bees to accomplish an end goal, which we'll get to. So don't give me static. Pollen is the other food source for bees. So this is their protein food source. And the protein in any given plant ranges between 6 and 30% protein. So at different times of the year, different plants are getting a higher protein source coming into the hive. They need that protein source to raise young. They can't eat pollen right off of the flower. It has a hard shell all the way around it. They need to break down that shell. Their body can't do it. They would just pass it out like we pass out corn. And so they actually have to pack it into the honeycomb. They pack it into the honeycomb. But while they're doing this, they're mixing saliva from their mouths, which is putting enzymes into that bee bread. There's yeasts and bacteria that are put into that bee bread by the bees. And they also put some nectar inside that bee bread. So it becomes a cake. And then inside the comb itself, it's almost fermenting. So the enzymes are breaking that shell down on the pollen. And once that shell is broken down, then the bees can feed off of that and actually get the protein out of the pollen. So you're going to see this inside your frames. Sometimes it's mixed in with the honey. Most of the time you're going to find it in the frame directly before the first frame of brood, because they keep it as close as they can to the brood chamber, because this is what they're using to feed the bees. Now, they're not feeding directly bee bread, but they're consuming it, and they're releasing food from a gland to feed the larva in the hive. So bee bread is used up pretty quickly in the hive. You won't find tons of it. You might find 2 complete frames inside a hive, or it'll be spread throughout the entire hive. So bee bread, that protein contains amino acids, everything broken down that the bees need for muscle growth and development. So if they don't have bee bread and they don't have pollen, they're not going to be raising young. So it's ranged that there's 33 to 120 pounds of bee bread is needed or consumed by one hive.
Over how long?
That's a year. 1 year. Okay, got food? Now we'll start talking about feeding our bees. So a lot of people want to feed their bees honey. This isn't the best food source for the bees, believe it or not, because honey is a long-term storage for the bees. And that storage breaks down some of the nutrients in it, and it's harder for the bees to digest. So the nectar will stimulate wax to be produced, so they can produce wax to build out comb. When they eat honey, they're not being stimulated to produce wax. So that's going to be important coming up because the end goal of what we want to accomplish in the hive, if we feed our bees honey, they're not going to be producing a lot of wax in the hive because they're not being stimulated to do that. When the queen is fed honey or food reserves, she knows that there's no flowers blooming, And so there's no need to produce a lot of bees to go out and collect nectar because there's nothing out there. And she's not going to produce bees because she knows they're using up their food supply, their reserves. So she's going to shut down laying eggs. So if you feed your bees honey, they could shut down the queen from laying eggs, and your hive isn't going to grow. It's going to decrease in size because she wants a smaller hive to survive through the winter because of the amount of food that they have inside the hive. Does everybody understand that? So honey isn't one of the best things to feed your bees. Now, another reason you don't want to feed honey is if you buy honey off the store shelf, you could actually be feeding your bees bad bacteria. So there is bacteria inside honey that's in spore form that once the bees eat it, it activates and you can spread disease inside your hive by grabbing my honey. If I have a hive that has disease and you start feeding your bees that honey, you might get American foul brood because the spores were in that honey. So another reason you don't want to feed honey. Now if you are going to feed honey, you want to feed the honey that came out of that hive. So if you take honey out of that hive and you say, oh man, I took too much honey, you can feed honey back. But the honey that came from that hive should go back into that hive. Are you going to keep it separate and remember? Probably not. Now, do I feed my bees honey? I feed my bees honey because I do bee removals. So when I do bee removals, I get a lot of honey. And if I find that I feel that it has been sprayed because there are no pesticides on it and the bees are healthy, I'll roll the dice and I'll throw that comb out into my yard and let the bees steal from it. So it's your choice. You can feed them honey. It works, but it's not the best way to do it. So what do you want to feed them? Let's try sugar syrup because sugar and water is the closest thing to nectar that we have. So you grab your Domino sugar and you add water, and next thing you know, you have nectar to feed your bees. So when are you going to feed your bees this sugar water? Well, if you do a honey harvest, you're taking all their honey. You should probably feed your bees so they can put back into the hive something to survive on. So if you want to produce bees, you're going to feed them a 1-to-1 sugar ratio. So that's what I'm talking about here, this sugar syrup. It's 1 package of sugar to 1 parcel of water, and you're going to have a 1-to-1 ratio of food. And I think the next frame goes into that 1-to-1, so I'll hold off a little bit. But you want to use white sugar. I know a lot of you use raw sugar. It's a little bit harder for the bees to digest. It's not going to kill the bees. But that brown sugar or molasses or the unprocessed sugars have molasses in it, which is harder for the bees to break down. So white sugar is actually the best thing to feed your bees, but you can feed, organic raw sugar if you like. You're just going to get different results. So powdered sugar. Some people have used powdered sugar. I don't recommend it because a lot of the companies add cornstarch to the powdered sugar to keep it from clumping, and you make a mess with your sugar syrup. So try to stay away from the brown sugars, the molasses, and the powdered sugar. Stick to your just plain old white sugar. So a 1-to-1 syrup. So you're going to mix up your witch's brew, and a 1-to-1 syrup is used to encourage the queen to stimulate her to lay eggs. Because now the bees are feeding her a 1-to-1 that is close to nectar. So she thinks that there's something in bloom outside, and she's going to want a lot of bees to go and get it. So she's going to lay as many eggs as she can until that source stops. Then she would slow down her egg production. So egg production will be stimulated in the queen when you feed a 1-to-1 sugar-syrup ratio. So what is 1-to-1? It's 1 part sugar, 1 part water by weight, not by volume. So it gets really confusing when you're trying to mix up a 15-gallon batch or a pint jar. So there's some easy ways and there's some math calculation ways. So you can do a 1-to-1 sugar syrup by 1 pound of sugar to 1 pint of water. You can do 8.3 pounds of sugar to a gallon of water. You can do 1 2-liter bottle for a 5-pound bag of sugar. So you can take that 2-liter container that you don't want to throw away, fill it up with water, and dump in the whole 5 pounds of sugar, and you got a 1-to-1 ratio. Now, me, I'll take a mason jar, I'll fill it to the top line with white sugar, take a teapot, heat the water up in the teapot, pour it in until the water's right up to the rim, and you have a 1-to-1 sugar ratio. So it will all dissolve. You just keep adding the hot water until it dissolves. Now it doesn't have to be that hot. You can even do just right out of the tap. 120 degrees on a 1-to-1 will dissolve the entire mixture. Now if you do it in the teapot, you don't want to feed it to the bees when it's 160 degrees. So you do it the night before, or if you're in a rush, you take a pot, stick this inside the pot, fill it with ice and water. Within 5 minutes, it's cooled down to the point where you can feed it to the bees. All right? So that's your 1-to-1 sugar ratio. And this is what we're mainly feeding our bees to stimulate production of bees or to stimulate the wax growth in Florida, because bees are finding food pretty much year-round. There was one other thing I wanted to say about that, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. So you can feed full hives, a full-blown hive, a 1-to-1 sugar ratio, or you'd be feeding if you have a nuke of bees and you're just starting out. So if your bees are just starting out, or you just did a split, or you just did a cutout, bringing bees from the wild in, you want to throw that 1-to-1 sugar ratio on them so they can start building comb and building up bees and getting strong fast. Because if you have strong bees, you're going to have healthy bees. So what time of the year do I want to start feeding a 1-to-1 ratio? Well, it depends what your end goal is. If you're trying to gauge for the bees to be ready for the next flow, okay? We know that the next flow is going to be March and April. So the cycle of the bees for the queen to lay an egg, that egg to go to a larvae, then to a pupa, and then to a full-grown bee is how many days? 22? 21 to 22 days. So you want to be at least 22 days ahead of the flow. Because if you want a lot of bees for when the flow starts, you don't want to start it when the flow starts, because you missed it. So if you were preparing bees to go out to California for the almonds, you'd be feeding already, because you want to build your bees up because they're leaving the first week in January. If they haven't left already. Have they left already, Sam?
Not yet.
Not yet? So it's real close. So your bees should be strong by now if they're going out to California. So they're pumping their bees up with a 1-to-1 sugar ratio in November, December to get them ready for almonds. Now if you're going to do citrus, you're going to start, citrus is blooming in March, right? Oranges, end of February, March. So I always start jacking my bees up the last week in January or the first week in February. So I'll start feeding everything. And so they're going to be building bees up, a lot of bees in the hive. So as soon as that flow hits, you have a lot of extra bees already going out collecting food. If you don't feed your bees before the flow hits, the flow's going to hit, your bees are going to go out and start bringing nectar back in. The queen's going to say, hey, I need a lot of bees to go get it. And she's going to start laying eggs in March and April. Well, by that time, the flow's done. 30 days from that, the flow's done, and now she has all these bees. And now there's sometimes not enough food to feed the bees that she just made. And so you have to be careful. You want to time it before that flow starts. You want to give it at least a month and start jacking your bees up so she does it early. And she's ready for when that flow starts. Then you're going to get a larger honey harvest in March and April. I've had bees that I didn't feed in January. The flow comes, the bees build up nice, but I don't get any honey from that hive until June or July. And so you can get 3 flows here in West Palm. You can get March, April, June, July, and September, October. And sometimes you can pull it, in between that too. Question?
If you feed them that close, how do you know when to stop? So you control, so you don't put that in the...
Correct. So that's another thing that you want to watch, is because you can be feeding these bees and you're feeding too much, okay? And they're storing that nectar inside the honeycomb. Now the queen doesn't have any place to lay eggs. It's called being honey bound. So you can actually stimulate your hive to swarm on you because she doesn't have any place to lay or grow. And she thinks that there's a lot of food out there. So she thinks it's a great time to swarm. So she's leaving. So you want to monitor while you're feeding. I'll start off with 3 times a week with 1 mason jar. Okay? So Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, they would get 1 mason jar. All right? Then once I start to see it inside the hive, being stored in the hive, I'll drop it down. And I'll go to 2 mason jars a week. Now they should be stimulated to be building comb at the same time. So if they're building comb and opening up more space, then you can continue that 2 jars a week. If they're not building comb fast enough, then you drop back to your 1 jar a week, because you still want that flow coming in of the nectar, because you don't want her to shut down, but you want them to be able to use up what they're grabbing out of here without storing it. So you're watching your hive. And again, if you go over that 18 pounds of nectar inside the hive, start backing down, slow it down, but you don't want to stop. Because if you stop, that flow is going to stop and the queen could stop laying. So you want to do once a week. Or you go down to a small jar. You don't have to do the big jar. So you can switch to a small jar, and so that nectar is still coming into the hive and she's still stimulated.
What if they're not taking it?
If they're not taking it, you got to talk to them nicer. There's a couple reasons why they might not be taking it. They might not be taking it because they're already in a flow. So they're bringing nectar back already. It might just be plain sugar and water. You might add
Vitamins?
ProHealth or any one of the supplements to it. Has lemongrass oil in it. Has different essences in it. So it actually smells good. I'll take and I'll put honey on the bottom of the lid and then put it on the feeder. They can smell the honey and then they recognize, hey, there's food in here, and they continue taking this. A lot of times it's just the fact they don't know that the sugar water's there. Sugar water doesn't have a smell, so they might go past it. So you can try putting honey on it. You can try mixing the ProHealth with it to stimulate. We want this more. You could be putting in too much sugar to water. So back down, add more water to it to bring it more to a consistency of nectar. All right, so that's your 1-to-1. 2-to-1. 2 parts sugar, 1 part water. By weight, pretty simple. This is more like honey, okay? To get a 2-to-1 syrup ratio, you typically have to do it with hot water on the stove. All right? Teapots will sometimes give you the 2-to-1, but a lot of times it'll granulate and start falling out. So a 2-to-1, you're mixing it on the stove. Now you have to be careful. You're not taking it to a boil. If you take it to a boil, you can actually change the chemical composition of the sugars, which becomes toxic to the bees. So if you brown your syrup, it's going to be toxic to the bees. Don't feed it to them. So you want to take that mixture to just when it's ready to boil, then take it off the stove. An easy way to tell is as you're mixing it, it's cloudy, like this. It'll be a cloud. And as soon as it goes clear, take it off the stove. Because as soon as it goes clear, you know that your sugar is all blended with that water, and it'll stay together. So when would you want to feed a 2-to-1 sugar ratio? Well, you want to feed a 2-to-1 when you don't want to stimulate the queen to lay eggs. You don't want the growth in your hive, but you want your bees to store it as honey and use it as reserves. So you do a 2-to-1, you put it on the hive, and it's going to tell the queen, we're on reserves. Slow down laying. You let them fill in the hive, and then you back down on your 2-to-1 feeding. Because your goal is just to fill up the hive with those 18 pounds of food and then leave it. So you don't have to continue to feed the 2-to-1 because you're not continually stimulating the queen. Once they're feeding off of the 2-to-1, they're going to be feeding off of it out of the comb anyways. So she's going to maintain that size of the hive. Because the last thing you want to do is feed in October a 1-to-1 ratio, stimulate the queen to make all these bees, your hive gets big, and then in December we get a frost. And now she has all these bees to feed, and they suck all the food out of the hive really quick, and then they starve. So you don't want a lot of bees in your hive in November or December, January. You're just maintaining the hive at the size that it is, or the queen will actually shrink it in size. So, and then in February, then you start stimulating it to build back up. So 2-to-1, 16 pounds of sugar to a gallon of water. 5 cups of granulated sugar to 2 cups of water. Pretty simple.
Alan, why not just decrease the amount of feeding to get her to shut off?
Decrease what?
Decrease the feeding to get her to shut down.
You can do that too.
Okay.
If you don't want the hive to grow at a particular time, just don't feed at all. That's if they have the reserves inside the hive to maintain themselves.
Okay, what about supplements to the sugar water? Do you recommend that? Or you mentioned Quickly Pro Health, which I had not.
Yeah, I always throw something in mine because it's usually only a teaspoon per gallon. So it's not a lot in there anyways. But you can use these, the instructions on the back. It'll help with tracheal mites. It actually builds their health. So there's benefits to using it. It's expensive though. This is $90 for this container.
That's the smallest container, huh?
No, they have smaller ones, but I buy it once and then be done with it. So you're looking at my bees, right? So my bees, the community feeder. This is after a cutout. I've taken the old comb and crushed all the honey out of it, and I save it and I feed it back to the bees. But then I throw it out on plywood or plastic garbage bags, and the bees just have a feast. All my bees will come and just feed off of that, and it's great to walk up to them and just be right in with them and not getting stung. So It's a little hairy because a lot of times you don't know what you're feeding your bees. You could be killing your bees. If somebody sprayed that hive and that hive had, pesticides on it, those pesticides are going back to the hive. So I'm very selective of what comb I put out in the yard. They'll even chew the wax, especially if it's white or yellow. They'll chew that wax and take it back to the hive and use it. So they leave the garbage behind. So a lot of that is really dark comb. That comb is 8 months to a year old or more. Actually, that one right there on the plywood, Sierra and I did a cutout. This guy had bees in his house for 15 years. You might have saw the picture on the website. And then he finally decided to get rid of them. We cut out 22 feet of wall and ceiling in between two studs. It was across the ceiling, it was down the downstairs wall, and it was up the upstairs wall. Thing was huge. 5 gallons of honey, and then I just put all the rest out there for the bees. They weren't nice bees. They were mean. After 15 years, they didn't want to leave. So, community feeder. How are we doing on time? Oh, pretty good. Community feeder. This is kind of like a community feeder. It's a spot where all the bees go to feed. Not the best thing. You're combining bees, you're spreading disease, all kinds of things can happen. If you want to do something different on a community feeder, I saw somebody who posted the chicken feeder. Somebody posted, I built a chicken feeder and he gave Christmas dinner to my bees. Well, a chicken feeder is a plastic, here we go. Matter of fact, there it is. Oop, too far. Too far. Chicken feeder. This one's a chicken feeder. Okay? They get the water from around the edges. Well, and this one is a dog feeder. I have one of these. And the water comes out down in the pan. But what happens with these is the bees get into such a frenzy. You saw in the last video, the bees just getting into that frenzy, feeding frenzy. They'll actually stand on the other bees and push the other bees down into it and drown the bees. And they have something to stand on. They're like, oh, I'm not getting sticky. Thanks, buddy. So it's a little daunting when they finish the syrup water and the whole container is filled with dead bees. You sit there and say, oh, geez, I probably shouldn't have done that. But the chicken feeders will work. But take the gravel that you put in the bottom of a fish tank, fill that trough up with gravel. Marbles. They feed right around it. I've used the expanded clay balls that some of the gardeners use in orchids. Those work great because they suck in water and the bees are just sucking right off of, I won't say it. Some of you are getting it. So you can put those clay balls all the way around and it soaks in the water and the bees really enjoy it. So that's a community feeder. Now you can also take number 8 wire. Number 8 wire, 8 squares per inch. And you can fold it in like a U shape and tuck it down in along that feeder also. And the bees will stand on the wire and drink through the wire. Now the commercial guys, the old timers, do a 55-gallon drum of sugar water and just put straw on the top. And so the bees ride the sugar right down to the bottom. So they stand on the straw and they suck the water in between the straw. So you can do the same thing with a 5-gallon bucket. If you have multiple bees or hives to feed, you can take a 5-gallon bucket, fill it up with sugar water, and cut the straw to lengths where it fits inside and floats on top. And your bees will sit on that and ride it down. But you're still going to kill bees. But it's an easy community feeder to do. Same with this one. You'd want to put something in that to keep it up. You can even use the hummingbird feeders right here. Hang a hummingbird feeder. Bees love them. They'll drink out of those all day long. If you want to get it so they find it, just rub a little bit of honey on those flowers. Once they know it's there, you're going to fill that up every day. The problem with community feeders is the hives that need the food don't get it. So your strong hives fight for the food, and they're the ones getting most of the food. The weak hives end up not getting anything, or they get stampled on and drowned in the feeder from the stronger hives. Community feeders can also set off robbing. So you want to keep that community feeder well away from your hives. Because, boy, once those bees, like you saw in the picture, once they start going crazy, they're like, oh, there's got to be more around here somewhere. And they're all going into all the other hives and raping and pillaging and doing all that good stuff.
How far away is well away?
100 feet minimum, plus, whatever. But I say 100 feet, But you can still stimulate robbing. You can still do it. So community feeders, not the best choice, but it works. This one up here, it's pretty cool. Has the jars, but it's a whole tray of jars. There's 6 jars underneath that protected little thing. And again, you'd start it with honey, and the bees would find it, and boy, you'd have a ton of bees around that thing. Now, commercial guys, I've seen them where they'll just put out a piece of plywood on a little bit of an angle, and they'll just drip lines continuously of sugar water, and man, the water doesn't even make it to the end of the plywood, and the bees have it finished. Donna, your question?
With the hummingbird feeder, is that a symbiotic relationship, or is there a killing that'll go on?
Well, you won't get any birds near it when the bees are there.
So what will happen if the birds are there first? They'll move.
They'll move. I mean, once they're out, they're not going to kill the birds. They might not get along real great when they're at the feeder, but you'll get a lot more fighting between bees at the feeder than you will bees to birds. The bees will fight for the food. So that's a community feeder. So entrance feeders. Entrance feeders are pretty easy for the backyard beekeeper. Commercial guys don't like entrance feeders because they're a lot of work. When you have 100 hives and you're going around to each hive and putting a little jar of food on it, it becomes labor intensive. But if you only have 1 or 2 hives, I think this is a great option for the backyard beekeeper. So an entrance feeder goes into the entrance of the beehive. And this is that one up in the corner. So this goes into the entrance of the beehive. Your mason jar has a sealed lid on top, and you'd poke 1 to 6 holes in this lid, depending on how fast you want your bees to feed off of this jar. If you want them to drink it in a day, put 6 holes. If you want them to share this over a 3-day period, put 1 hole. And so you're going to poke 1 hole, and you can use a thumbtack. That's the size of hole that you want. You just push a thumbtack through there. You can drill it if you want, but there's really no need. Just the tip of it, the point 15 feet away from the hive, then walk up to the hive and set it into the feeder, and just go down the row with a bucket full of these and do each hive. So this part stays into the hive, and then you can come back 2 days later with a bucket and just start grabbing jars. And you can have another one ready to replace it, or you can take the empty jars back to the house and then refill them.
Our bees are trained. You get about 10 feet away from the hive and they start coming for the jar.
Yeah, they know. So your feeder's going into the entrance here. I always like to push mine to the outside edge, either side. Then you're cutting a 3/4 by 3/4 inch strip of wood, and you're putting that right next to the feeder inside the entrance of the hive. So now you're down to a 1.5 to 2 inch opening at the opposite side of the hive. Now if you don't do that, if you just stick this in the center, other bees can come in and just go right around and into that feeder. And the other bees aren't guarding it that close, and they're they're starting a robbing situation into your hive. If you put the bar across there and have the entrance on the opposite side of the hive, a rogue bee would have to go in that side all the way to the other side, and by that time they've been found out, and they can protect this 1.5 inch opening a lot better than a big wide opening. So whenever you're feeding, drop that bar in there, put the entrance to the opposite side, leave it in place, leave this in place, only remove the jar, take it back, and refill it. Now, when you take it out, be ready, there's going to be bees on this side, and they're going to be mad that you're taking their food source. So I would do it with a veil. You might even smoke the hive just before you take it. And when you go to put it back, you might want to smoke a little bit too, because I've been there fumbling around trying to get it in the hole, and I'm not going there. And bees start coming out, and next thing you know, I don't have a veil on, I have my flip-flops on, and bees are chasing me down the street. So, an entrance feeder. I like entrance feeders for backyard beekeepers. They work pretty well. So all different types. This one has one hole in it. This one has multiple holes in it. This is another entrance feeder where it has a pan that they're drinking out of the pan. This is an example of what it looks like on the hive. Now this guy did it right. He put it to the end of the hive, but he didn't put a bar across here. So now bees can get in here to rob that. This one's pretty cool. This is for a Coke bottle, 2-liter bottle, where it goes into the hive. And so you can recycle old bottles to use. That's pretty cool. Entrance feeders. Any questions? Only downfall is you can start robbing. But if you put that bar in there, that pretty much eliminates it. And you have to do it more often because it's container size.
The hives that I got had the feeder set up on the top lid. Is there
We're going to get there.
something wrong?
Nope, we're going to get there. So this is entrance. We're talking about entrance. So, question in the back.
What's the length of that bar?
What's the length of what bar? This one? Oh, it's about that long. It's got to be 12 inches long. I'm real bad with measurements, so. You want it the length so you leave an 1.5 inch entrance at the end. You know, whatever. Here, measure it. I don't know. 9 inches. Anybody else say 10? Yeah, I'm not going there tonight, okay? So, entrance feeders. Let's go. Move on. So, a division board feeder. A division board feeder goes inside the beehive. So, do I need to move all this stuff and show you? I don't have one.
You're gonna open it up, you don't have one?
I don't have one.
You gonna smoke?
What'd I do?
It's like a frame.
Smoke it first.
This one. So you're taking out one frame. You're taking out one frame, usually on the outside edge, okay? And you're replacing it with this piece right here. So it drops right down into the hive. It has number 8 wire going across the top. So you're filling it up with your sugar water. And the bees can go right and crawl onto that wire and drink right off of it. And they don't even have to leave the hive. So they can feed, morning, noon, and night. The foragers can go out and still forage for food, and the young bees still have access to the food. And so it works pretty well inside the hive. The only downfalls to this, and you don't have to refill it as much because these things hold almost a gallon of sugar water. So a downfall to this could be that your sugar water can go bad before they drink it all. So you would definitely want to use ProHealth mixed with your feed, because when you mix the ProHealth in with the sugar water, it won't get bacteria growing inside the sugar water. It keeps bacteria growth down. So your sugar water lasts longer. You won't get fermentation using the ProHealth. So it lasts longer using the ProHealth. So the the feeder, the division board feeder, this piece here can be a lid on top of it, so that would drop down inside on a different style. This is a different style. And the bees would go down through these two holes, and then they're feeding off of the screen from inside the feeder. So it does help with the drowning because bees aren't able to get into it as quickly. But you still get a lot of drowning inside. So when you go to take it out, you find a lot of dead bees. Another thing, if they empty that out and you don't get to it to refill it quick enough, they start building comb inside it. Burr comb inside. Or they start bonding burr comb to the sides in between the frames and the feeder. So you can get a cleanup issue where you got to go in there and scrape out burr comb. So that's a division board feeder. For a commercial guy, or somebody with 20 hives, it works well because they can fill them fast, just pull the lid. A lot of them have pumps where they'll just pump it right in, go down the row. So, division board feeder. Internal top feeder. So that's this one here. There's all different kinds of styles of this one. Different manufacturers. So this one is 2 troughs, and it goes inside a super. So this would just go on top of your hive, with the lid taken off, And then the bees go up in between these cracks in between the 2 troughs, and they come out these 2 holes underneath the screen. And then the bees can curl around the screen and drink as the level goes down. So these really great for commercial situations or a lot of hives because you don't have to worry about bees when you're filling them. You take off the lid and no bees are coming out because they can't get out. And you could sit here and fill these up easily and not disrupt any bees. They still kill a lot of bees. They drowned a lot of bees. This one you definitely have to use the Pro Health with, or you're going to get this sludge of fermenting sugar, mush, and mold inside the feeder. So internal top feeder. Now, we can talk about internal feeders right along with this. Anything can be an internal feeder. So if you take a super or another deep box and put it on top of your hive, okay? Then you set this on top of the frames, put your jar on there, and then put your lid on top of that empty super or deep. Now you have an internal feeder where no other bees are going to get to it. It's not going to create robbing. And it's an entrance feeder that's now used inside the hive. Chris? We're getting there. All these cool little tricks. So you can take your entrance feeder. If you don't like putting it in the entrance, you can use it up top with a deep box right around it. Then put the lid on it. If you have a top bar hive, these work great. You throw this inside the top bar behind the last frame. Put the lid on, close it up. The bees have access to it. No other bees from the outside have access to it. So internal feeders can be anything. You can put a feeder inside a hive, no matter what type it is, and feed your bees if you're having robbing problems. Okay? But there's different styles. You can buy all different styles. A lot of them, this would be the ring, just the spacer that you would use for some of them. So this would go in between your lid, just to give you the space to put the feeder in there. But like I said, it can be any thickness. It can be a deep, it can be a super, it can be a couple inches, depending on your feeder itself. So internal feeders. Dead bees, I think I covered everything there. So somebody was saying, can we put that thing in the top? Is it you? Okay, there it is. Right like that, right?
Exactly.
So your lid, you can just cut a piece of plywood, the size of your lid, drill a hole in it, this size, and now put it away until you're ready to feed your bees. When you're ready to feed your bees, remove the lid that's there, put that piece of plywood on top, throw a jar on top, and now you're feeding bees inside the hive, but they don't have to go outside the hive to get it. You drill that hole in the center, like that one is, and you have brood right below that, and this thing starts leaking, it drips 24/7 onto the brood. Not drown them, it'll make them abscond. Your bees will leave. A lot of times, because that is dripping onto the brood, it's killing the brood, and they can't control it, so a lot of times it'll make the bees leave. Or it'll kill all the brood on that frame. They'll start yanking all the larvae from it. You'll start seeing larvae out on the front because it's leaking. It's dripping right into the hive. So you don't want it dripping into the hive. So if it leaks, at least the back corner, it's not dripping on brood. So, but then the next thing you have is then it drips down onto the bottom board, and the wood starts to absorb the sugar water. And then I've had bees on the outside of the hive, all around the edges, drinking the dripping food that's leaking out the side. And so now I created a robbing situation. That hive usually doesn't survive because the other bees just take it over. They're saying, man, there's sugar dripping in there, let's go. And so they go inside. So I don't like the ones in the top. You can make up your own choice.
Now, just a word from a novice, learn the hard way. Don't store that in the refrigerator, get it cold, and then put it out there, because as it warms up, it expands, and it just floods the hive.
Yep. He refrigerated the syrup.
I had made a whole bunch of bottles, so I thought I was ahead of the game. Now,
He refrigerated, it got cold, he put it outside, it expanded, the volume changed, so it forced the thing to leak. And so then any leaking is bad. When you're feeding, any leaking is bad because it's going to drip onto the ground. Other bees are going to be attracted, ants are going to be attracted, everything's going to be attracted. So you don't want leakage. Okay?
If it's accidental leakage, can you hose it with that?
Yeah, you can hose it. I mean, if it's just a little bit, it's not going to hurt anything. But, this whole jar dripping out, it's going to be a problem.
I do it all the time now, but I just got 1 or 2 holes, and it works good.
Yeah, and if you're going to make sugar water up ahead of time, throw Pro Health in it, and I've had it last for a month, so you can be a month ahead.
I just don't put it out cold anymore.
Baggie feeder. Chris, this is for you. All right, so baggie feeder. So you take a super, you can cut it in half, and now you have 2 spacers. Okay, or you can build your own spacer. So this goes on top of the hive with the lid gone, because the lid's going to go up here now. And you're going to take a baggie, and you're going to fill it up with water, sugar water, and you're going to seal it. And you're going to turn it upside down to make sure it's sealed. Once it's sealed, you're going to take the lid off of your hive, and you're going to set this down on the frames. See, it's leaking already. And you know what the downfall to these are? They leak. So you lay the baggie down like this, okay? And you take a razor blade and you cut a line on that top baggie. And you cut another line. And you cut a third line. 3 lines right across the top. Sugar water stays inside, believe it or not. You don't want to cut the edge. That's bad. Just right in the center, maybe 12 inches long. So about 3 inches long, 3 stripes right down the center. The bees come up, and you're putting the lid on top. Bees come up, say, hey, what is that? They start walking on the top, and they walk up to those lines, and they drink right out of those lines. And they suck that whole baggie dry like that. Problem with these, you're creating a lot of mess because these aren't recyclable. You can't reuse them, can't fill it back up because there's holes cut in it. So it's only one use. If they leak, they're going to leak down onto the comb, and you're going to kill bees and piss bees off. But they work, cheap, disposable. If you need something in a pinch, grab a baggie, seal it up, fill it, set it on the hive first, then cut your slits in the top. Any questions on a baggie feeder? Chris?
I'm wondering, instead of putting it at the top, if you put the spacer on the bottom board and have, they could come down to get it, and if it drips, you could put like a lip plastic.
Yeah, but now you got to lift the entire hive off to put it under there. Every time you're going to refeed. You know, if you're only putting one baggie in there, okay.
Not the perfect feeder.
No, not a perfect feeder. A lot of different feeders. So that's a baggie feeder. If you're in a pinch, don't have anything, you need to feed your bees, grab a baggie feeder. It works. So I just thought that was cool. You know, you don't lose bees. I've done it before. Amazingly, if it doesn't leak, there's not one drowned bee in there. It's crazy. All right, grease. Grease patties. So this is where we can talk about pollen patties, grease patties, protein feeding. So you can buy pollen patties. It's a mixture of honey, pollen, soy meal. They're not using straight pollen. The pollen's too expensive. So most of it's soy that they're using for the protein source. Lemon grass essence in it, wintergreen in it. Comes in a flat patty. You peel the paper off the top. You throw it on the top of your hive. Put the lid back on. And sure, the bees, you know, they'll eat it. But next thing you know, you have 1 million hive beetles in your hive because the hive beetles love it. If you want to attract hive beetles, throw a pollen patty in your hive. You'll have more hive beetles than you know what to deal with because they can hide under it. They'll eat it. They'll lay eggs in it. It's crazy. We don't need to feed our bees down here pollen patties. No need. That's a northern thing. We're talking about South Florida. Don't feed pollen patties. No reason to feed pollen patties. If you want to feed pollen or a substitute to your bees, let me back up here. Nope, this way. This, right here, is a pollen feeder. You fill this up with pollen substitute. The bees fly in the bottom, all around the bottom here. And they go in, they grab the pollen substitute and take it back to the hive. So their hairs on their bodies will be totally covered. They'll have big pouches on their legs with it. It works. You know, a lot of times it's hard to get to the bees to start using it. Some of them are better than others. If they smell more like lemon, you have a better chance. So that's pollen. But I never feed pollen or pollen patties. I tried it. It's not worth it. When it rains, it gets caked up. If you're doing large production of bees, a lot of the commercial guys, queen rearers, they'll have the pollen around because they're trying to stimulate and have a lot of pollen in the hive. But this is pretty neat. Grease patties. It's Crisco mixed with sugar, honey, salt, and essences of oil. So it's a all-natural, organic. I don't know if it's organic or not, but it's not chemicals, you know. And you use wintergreen oil, tea tree oil, lemongrass oil, and it helps with varroa mite, tracheal mites. So you create the patties using 2 pounds of solid vegetable oil, Crisco, to 3 pounds of sugar, 1 pound of 2 to 1 sugar syrup, or just straight clean honey. It's easier to use the honey, has a better consistency. and then 1 cup of pulverized mineral salt, and 3 tablespoons of wintergreen oil, tea oil, lemongrass oil, whatever you want to give them. I've even mixed the Pro Health in with the grease patty instead of using the straight essences. And this will help with tracheal mites also. So it won't help with the varroa, but it'll help with tracheal mites. And so the grease patties will help with varroa and tracheal mites. It's not proven. Guy's been doing it forever. Seems to work, so I added it to the program tonight.
To clarify, you don't really do that.
I have done it.
You have, but
Um,
don't.
if I currently no. If I have varroa bad, it's one of the things that I'll do for varroa. But now I've gotten to the point where I'll use drone comb rather than the grease patties. It gets messy when you start doing 20 or 30 hives. And that patty, you just put it on a piece of wax paper, small square wax paper, set it right on the top frames, put the lid back on. You can put a spacer in between. The spacer can be like a 3/4 inch spacer around the hive, and then put your lid on. Bees will go up and feed on it. They're going for the honey and the lemongrass. So this is my backyard again. So I just added this as a little tidbit, because when you first become a beekeeper, you have all these great ideas. And I see it all the time. You know, now that I'm teaching, I go up and I say, or people will say, hey, couldn't I do this? And I'm like, yeah, sure, go ahead, do that. See what happens. You know, and you think you have this great idea. But I found out that they've been beekeeping for thousands of years, and almost everything has been invented already. So this was a bee feeder that came out of my mind. It's a community feeder. And this is when I had 40 hives in my backyard. And I have an acre. Okay? 40 hives in my backyard. And so I took a 55-gallon drum, laid it down on its side, 55 gallons of 1-to-1 sugar. Wow. All right? Then there's solar panels up top, and the solar panels keep the rain off of the whole thing also. And then on the back side, which you'll see in a little bit, is a pump. And then there's a float switch inside the 55-gallon drum. So when the sugar water is empty, it shuts off the pump. And the solar panel charges the battery, and the pump is a marine pump. And it's pressure switch activated. So it builds up pressure, and it shuts off the pump. And when they drink the syrup, and the pressure is relieved in the line, it kicks on again. And so it'll on and off, on and off, on and off all day long. So this is one of the trays. So inside the tray you have the expanded clay balls, okay? And you have soaker line, micro tubing soaker line, okay? And so the sugar water comes up here into this divider, and I had 12 separate lines coming off of this, and they all went around the rings, and that thing would just weep. It was beautiful, you know, just weep. And any extra would go down into the expanded balls, and they would soak up in the expanded balls, and then they could drink it off the expanded balls. But then if you got too much sugar, there was a drain right at the center here. And this is the drain line coming down from the one up above. So it drips down, and it goes back into the 55-gallon drum. So it all circulates around, right? And look at how many bees I got there. There's just feeding frenzy going on, isn't it? Now look at how many bees are there, because I turned it on. So I turned it on, and you know, not one clay ball got wet. Bees were waiting for the shit to come out of the hose. Oh, come on, come on! When's that damn pump gonna kick on? And this was 3 trays high.
Didn't work on a cloudy day though, right?
That's why I had a deep cell battery. The battery could sustain it all day because the pump was only clicking on for short bursts, you know. So there was this 3 trays full of bees, right? I was feeding every bee for 3 miles around my house.
Al, only you, buddy.
Only me. You know, I was so excited about this.
Anything less.
I was so excited about this. I was like, commercial guys are going to be crazy over this, you know? So 3 trays of bees, right? And look, each one, this is the pump line coming up to feed each one of these. And there were bees on, I mean, the bees were everywhere. It worked beautifully. I went to see about patenting it. They wanted $6,000 to patent it. I was like, you know, I don't think it's that good. So this was a side shot, right? So you had the pump here. I even had a filter on it, right? So it would filter out any garbage or anything before it got up into the soaker line. And man, it worked. They could drink 55 gallons of sugar syrup in a day and a half. Day and a half. And I'm talking a bee carrying a drop back to the hive, and they're drinking 55 gallons. I thought, man, this is good for a week. I went out there the next day. It's like, damn, it must be leaking somewhere. Wasn't leaking. They were drinking it, right? About 3 months of feeding I was feeding bees like crazy because I was growing bees. I was raising bees to give away, right? My neighbor had bees for honey. And he came to me and goes, you can't believe how much honey I got. I'm like, oh, no, I can't believe it. There's no flow going on or anything. He's like, I got 4 boxes high and every one of them stacked with honey. He harvested that stuff. It was about 2 weeks later. It was all granulated, it was all granulated. And so that leads me to when you go to feed your bees, you're harvesting all the honey that you want off of that hive before you start feeding. Because when you start feeding, they're going to mix it in with the real nectar and convert it into honey. And they're going to store it as honey. And you're going to be harvesting your own sugar water. Sugar water isn't really honey. In China, they do it that way, and they sell it to us at about 10 cents a gallon, illegally. But you don't want to harvest. It's actually illegal to have supers on your hive when you're feeding. Now, do they enforce it? No. But they don't want you storing sugar water and harvesting it as honey. Sometimes it tastes pretty good. I mean, it's a really light honey, but it tastes like honey. It does. It tastes like honey. So you only want to give them food, fake food, when there's no honey in the hive. And when the flow starts, you got to stop feeding, because then you're getting real honey. So take your supers off when you're feeding. Let them build up the 2 boxes. I don't harvest honey usually from my 2 deep boxes. I leave that for the bees. So when I'm feeding, they can fill that up with fake stuff. And then I'll put a super on top, and then I only harvest off of the top. But after I'm done feeding. There's a question back there?
Yeah, Al, does that apply at the end of January, beginning of February, when you're going to be feeding them one-on-one? You want to pull all the honey out of it? If you
Pull it. Pull it.
First.
You pull it. Anything that's capped, pull it. As long as you're going to feed them. If you're not going to feed, don't pull it. Leave them enough. But pull that honey off, because what it does is it creates space inside the hive. I even like to scrape and strain. So then they have more room to build fresh comb. It's a good way to get them to start fresh again. Especially if that black comb, scrape some of that off. Put it on the outside edges, and they'll rebuild fresh comb in there. Because that comb is going to start absorbing insecticides, the wax, it builds up. So you leave your comb in there for year after year after year, and you get a die-off. Maybe you got toxins built up in your comb, and to a point where now it can finally kill them, because the wax is holding that. I take frames out and put brand new frames in, every year. So you're getting new growth.
So the cycle is you harvest the honey, then you feed.
Then you feed.
When you have to stop feeding at some point.
Correct.
And wait how long again to harvest the honey?
Well, so you're going to feed end of January, beginning of February. Okay? Start feeding. Unless your bees are starving now. You might need to start feeding now if they're starving. So you're going to start feeding the end of January, beginning of February. And you're going to feed for a month. So you're going to get into March is when you're going to stop feeding. So you're only feeding for a month. If you're doing 3 jars a week, you're talking about, 12 jars, which isn't a lot. So if you only have 1 or 2 hives. But you're monitoring your hive to watch that growth. Now in your situation, you're going to want to feed to get the growth. Because yours is you have 2 nukes, 5 frames. So you want to see brand new comb being built. So they can't build the comb without sugar to activate that gland. And so they need to convert the sugars into wax. And so in your case, you're going to feed. You're going to do 3 jars a week almost to the end. And
We already have one.
but that honey's in the bottom boxes for them. You're not harvesting anything off of yours. Okay? When you're just starting a nuke, leave everything in there for them. And then you're going to add another box on top. When they fill out 8 frames with comb, add another box on top. You might even have to bring 2 frames up from down below and put it up top to get them to come up into that second box. Then let them build out that second box totally. When you have 2 boxes of bees, stop feeding. And that should be perfect timing for the spring flow. Then you throw a super on top of that. And then you're collecting anything off that super. Now, will they move nectar? Sometimes. But if you're stimulating that queen, they're going to keep room in there for her to lay eggs. And so they're going to consume that nectar. It's hard to get them to oversaturate with nectar. If you fed every day of the week for a month, you're going to get them honey bound. It's going to be a big hive, but they're going to swarm. They're going to get big, swarm, and be gone. Add those boxes, keep it growing, and then stop feeding.
I just wanted to make it clear, though, I think some people might be getting confused. If you open your hive and you have open nectar, what did you say, 3 frames of open nectar, none of this applies to you don't need to feed your bees, right?
Unless you get into February. So,
But if they're bringing in nectar and you have open nectar in the hive, why would you even feed them then?
well, again, it depends on your bees themselves. All right. If your bees have, you could have 2 boxes high, okay, and you have 4 open frames of nectar, okay. But you might see the queen, the number of bees dropping down in size in your hive, okay. The outer frames now don't have bees on them, okay. Well, you want to stimulate her even more to create more bees, so you have jam-packed with bees for the beginning of March. So, but if you're jam-packed with bees to the outside and you have open nectar, yeah, none of this is applying to you. That hive is ready to go for the spring.
Okay.
This is mainly for smaller hives, 1 box, where now you're building it up to 2, or a nuke that you're trying to create a full box and that second box, or 2 boxes high, and you're seeing a decrease in number of bees. Then you're feeding to stimulate that box. Or if you take that 2 frame, that maybe you have 2 boxes of bees, and you're like, man, this thing's great. Has nectar, has 2 full boxes of bees, split it. Drop the 2, now feed both of them. Add a box on top of each one, and now you have 2 hives that now you're feeding, and you have 2 going into the spring flow, and then you're ready. Now you have to be careful in December and January in splitting that hive, because the drone population can be down and you can get a shitty queen. because she's going out to mate. She doesn't have as many drones to mate with, so she's coming back less inseminated than she should. But if that happens, you keep that queen until just before spring and then replace her with a fully mated queen. So you get a good queen going into winter or spring.
You determine a fully mated queen by her length?
No, you can, and how plump she is, but you'd have to be pretty good at looking at her. Most people can't tell. You can tell by the brood pattern. Your brood pattern, solid frame of capped brood, end to end. Don't touch her. You got a good queen. If you have holes and she's laying over here, then over here, this frame has half of brood, that queen's either old or not mated well. Questions?
Why do we need to feed them at all, really? I mean, can't bees make it?
They can. And it depends on what your individual goal, is. And I've said this before, if you're getting into beekeeping, the first thing you have to say to yourself is, why am I getting into beekeeping and what do I want to accomplish? Okay? If you just want to get into beekeeping to sit next to the hive and watch them come and go and say, hi girls, how are you today? You know, sure. Just let them be bees. You know, they know how to do it. They've been doing it for a long time. Now, if you're getting into this to feed honey to all your neighbors and give them to gifts and consume everything that you make, you're going to need, and you've seen this at your house, where, Al, I thought there was a flow going on. I'm not getting any honey. Well, you didn't prep your bees before the flow, and they're consuming the entire flow to build up the hive, and then the flow's done, and now they're eating everything that's coming into the hive because the flow's quit. They still have enough to survive, but they're not getting ahead until fall. So if your goal is honey, you're feeding those bees in January, February, build them up strong, then you're getting a flow in March, April, June, July, August, September. You're taking 100 pounds of honey off of your hive in a year. If you don't feed your bees, you're taking 20 to 50 pounds a year. More in the 20. You know, but if you're in a good area, you can not feed and your bees will produce, 50 pounds. But if your goal is to make honey, you got to feed and stimulate that queen because she doesn't know what you know. You know that this stuff's coming into bloom. And you've got to know the plants around your area too. If I know that I'm in an area where there's a lot of Brazilian pepper, I'm going to jack my bees up just before that Brazilian pepper goes into bloom, Because some areas might not have any Brazilian pepper. Well, you don't want to jack your bees up, because they might not have the same flow. And there's pockets of flows. Every little location, I have bees all over Palm Beach County, and man, I'll get 15 gallons off of this one, and 2 blocks away, I get a gallon. So they're different areas, different situations. So you have to know your bees. You're going in, inspecting your bees, and seeing how much nectar's in there, what's coming into the hive. Question?
Yes, I have one 10-frame box that I had in one spot since October. We're doing a lot of yard renovation abruptly. We took out all the banana trees, we took out all the fire and all that. I moved them abruptly up to the back of my house and roped them off because my grandkids came this week.
You moved the bees?
I had to move them because the bobcat was coming in and out.
Okay.
And they liked him on the bobcat.
Okay.
But anyways, they were good. They stayed there. I left several cinder blocks and I didn't know what I was doing. And the ones that were out came back to those cinder blocks.
And then you moved them again?
They find them with a
I
couple
moved the
days.
cinder blocks up
Yeah.
there and they moved
At
them
night,
in.
yeah.
But the difference was the heftiness of the box. I could barely lift that box, okay?
Mhm.
So I know it's got honey. I thought I needed an excluder to put another
You're running one box?
one box.
Well, you want to get another box.
Well, the only other thing I have is another 10-frame large box.
Right, put that on top.
Without the, that's why I was waiting to get the excluder, but then I
Right.
realized you don't
Well,
need one.
I recommend for backyard beginning beekeepers, okay, if you're just beginning, you want 2 deep boxes for brood chamber. Then you're super. Because if you have a lot of bees, they're going to be healthy.
Well, not
Okay.
a lot of bees and it's heavy and I don't know.
Yeah, but you're going to get swarming because they're going to outgrow that 10-frame box and it's going to swarm. When she swarms, okay, in a single 10-frame box, a lot of times they'll all be stimulated. Too many bees will be stimulated and go with the queen. She won't take half of the bees. She'll take 3/4 of the bees. And you're not left with enough to continue on. And so it's iffy. If you have 2 boxes high, in the bottom box you'd have 30,000 bees. And she'd swarm. She might take 20,000 bees with her. You're left with 10. If you have 2 boxes high, you got 60,000 bees. Even if she takes 30,000 bees, you still have 30,000 left. A lot of times it'll swarm with 2 boxes. You won't even know that it swarmed. I promise, you won't even know. It's a natural process. Then super it, okay?
How long after? I mean, should
Once-
it be harvesting honey and then feed?
No, you're just building bees.
Just build.
You're building bees. You're feeding bees and adding another box.
Just add.
Right. But commercial beekeepers will run 1 box with an excluder and then put a super on top. Because their goal is to create a lot of honey. Okay, and they don't want to lift 2 boxes of bees. It's heavy. But you're not, backyard beekeepers, you're not moving your hives around like a commercial beekeeper. Once it's in that spot, it stays there. Usually forever. So run it 2 boxes high. Run it 4 boxes high. Who cares? You're not lifting like a commercial beekeeper is.
I guess, kind of a follow-up, if you start with the 2 boxes
Mm-hmm.
from scratch, how long is it typically going to take to fill those 2 boxes?
How much are you feeding them?
Of all you have.
So you can, I've had bees fill out that box in 2 weeks. Okay? I've had bees that it takes 2 months.
So if we
I'll-
we get started in February, like you suggested last month, and feed 3 times a week like you were just talking about,
Yeah.
then we've got a shot at filling them up
Yeah.
March or April.
Yeah, exactly. And harvesting in March and April. Exactly. And so, go ahead, Donna.
Well, we're talking numbers. What's a good way to approximate how many bees are in one 10 frame? How many bees would fill up a 10 frame? How do you count this? I'm hearing banding about 20,000, 20,000. How do you know?
Right. Well, one deep frame, if it's brood, front and back, solid, like yours is, that's 1,500, isn't it, Glenn? Per side? Don't quote me, but I believe it's 1,500 bees that are going to be born off of each side of that. So that's going to be 3,000 bees. So there's 1,500 spaces on each side of a 10 frame deep. Okay? So if you're looking at a frame down inside, okay, you're looking at 3,000 bees, 1,500 on each side when you're looking at them. So that gives you 10 frames, so it's 30,000 bees. So it's 3,000 bees per frame, both sides, when it's packed solid. Okay? So, you're 20,000 to 30,000 with a complete box. And then you add a box. And once you get up into the supers, you can get your hive, 3 boxes high, and you're up 60,000 bees real quick.
Don't piss them off.
Yeah. And your bees will get angry when they're hungry. I've had people in December and January call me up and say, I got Africanized bees. No, your bees are hungry. They're telling you something. If your bees are cranky, feed them. And it will calm them down. You'll get calmer bees. Questions? Any other questions? Question?
Under normal circumstances, good circumstances, how much will one box produce of honey?
Well,
A year.
yeah, that's a tough question. If I'm a commercial beekeeper and I'm working that hive, I can get 100 to 150 pounds of honey off that hive a year. But that's moving it around, chasing the flow. Okay? Because I might take it to citrus, and the more they have to choose from in a close proximity. Like if I take this box to an orange grove when it's in full bloom, they'll do 50 pounds of honey in 6 weeks. Okay? That quick. Each box. One box, not too high. You get too high, you're getting 75 to 100 pounds.
Backyard.
But a backyard beekeeper, when they're foraging off of, you're getting anywhere between 25 to 50 pounds of honey a year by just not trying. You know, but if you work that hive, backyard beekeepers can get it up to 100 pounds of honey in a year. And a lot of it has to deal with the bees. You'll get good bees and you'll get bad bees. I'll have a box of bees here and a box of bees here. I mean, literally this close. And this one's continually spinning off honey. And this one, I don't take a drop out of it. And because this one, she's just laying eggs like crazy. This one's just doing brood continuously. You know, never storing any honey. So the different types of bees will give you different results to your, and again, so you want to figure out what you want to do out of this hive that you're creating. Do you want to sit there and watch bees? That's fine. If you want to make honey, you can get involved in a little bit more. If you want to produce bees, like I produce bees. I don't produce a lot of honey. I produce a lot of bees to give them away. So I'm doing everything to stimulate more bee production. Before they start storing honey, I'll split it. So now I have 2 hives. And they're saying, damn, we were this close to starting making honey, you know. And so, then I split them again. They're like, oh, come on. Yeah. Any other questions?
Your flowers, how long did it take you to get all those flowers?
Boom! They grew like crazy. I brought in 16 20-yard dump truck loads of the mulch from Palm Beach County. Not mulch, but the compost. Backyard was filled with 6 to 8 inches of compost. And through, it was almost 100 pounds of wildflower seeds on an acre. I mean, it grew like crazy. The shit was this tall, you know. And it was wild. People were stopping along Forest Hill Boulevard to look at my backyard. And I'm like, there's bees in there, you know. But now I'm on Forest Hill. And so I did a privacy mound between Forest Hill and my bees. And if you drive past there, you're going to see this nice mulched mound that I now have Simpson stoppers on. I went with wild coffee, some natives to get into the flow of things. But then I spread buckwheat seeds on the entire mound. Sierra got me hooked on the buckwheat seeds. Buckwheat is a cover crop. Only grows about this tall, grows fast. It's blooming in 10 to 15 days. It's blooming. And it gives a lot of nectar, and the bees love it. And so I bought a 75-pound bag of buckwheat seeds, and this year I threw them on the canal banks all around my house. And they fight, and they'll come right up through grass, weeds, anything. And so I posted a picture. You saw the canal bank totally white. That's all buckwheat. And my bees every morning are over there. It was enough to do 10 acres of buckwheat. And, I just got it coming up. The city...
That's not how I do buckwheat.
No. She had a packet like this, and I was like, oh, it'll work for that packet. It'll work for the big thing.
I was on my garden beds
Yeah.
for a month, that was it.
Johnny's Seeds online. $60 for 75 pounds.
It will not grow in the summer here.
It won't grow in the summer. You got to plant it now, and you get a good crop. So, any other questions?
Yes.
Okay, CG.
Jeez, I've had my hand up for an hour.
Oh.
To your knowledge, are there any flowering places where the bees will go where the honey could be toxic? Because there was an article on TV about the rhododendrons and how bad it was.
Yeah, what's the one?
What about rattlebox?
Yeah, there's another one. It's a bush, and it grows about this tall. Red flowers or white flowers. Oleander. Oleander's poisonous honey.
So how do we know what, I mean...
And what's the vine? The jasmine.
Jessamine or something, right?
Jasmine is poisonous. But you know what? The bees don't go to it. No. So you really don't have to worry because the bees aren't going to the poisonous stuff to us. Well,
I've got rattlebox, it's a native ground cover, and my bees are going to it,
and that one's poisonous?
for the heart.
Okay.
But
But-
you know, I imagine there's got to be a lot of it in the honey.
Yeah, there would have to be probably a lot.
There's not that much of it, so.
I haven't died from it. None of it. So I haven't worried. But you know, I think it was rhododendron. It's a funny story, and I say that they won't go to it, but yes, they do go to it. There's a funny story about rhododendron, and I believe it was England. Do they grow rhododendron in England?
Do it in Massachusetts, everywhere.
Rhododendron, back in the 2nd century, 1st century, I don't know, when they would fight with swords and stuff, they would take rhododendron honey and leave jars behind. So they would make it look like they were shedding some of their goods to make it lighter so they could travel faster. And the enemy was going through and taking what they wanted, and they found these jars of honey. And it was toxic honey, and they were gorging on this honey because, it made them sick, and they couldn't fight. And so there was a case where it was used in honey was used in battle, and it was rhododendron honey, and it was evil, medieval. That's when it was.
Does that include bougainvillea and azalea?
No.
Yeah, I've never seen bees on my bougainvillea. They might go there. I don't particularly see them there, so I don't think that's a problem.
She wants to know if you have any buckwheat seeds left.
No, I finished planting them on the mound. So, what's
You
that?
can buy a little packet that'll cover 100 at Whole Foods.
Amazon has buckwheat seeds. She's saying Whole Foods has them.
Just for my garden, it covers
Small
100
package.
square feet.
Jay.
You're gonna put this online?
Yeah, this is going to be online, and thank you, Greg, for recording it. So you get stuck hearing me one more time. Did anybody learn anything from that? Feeding is feeding. There's a lot of different ways to do it. You'll hear a million different ways. Keep it basic. Everybody gets a feeder tonight. So I built feeders for everybody. So please only take one. So there's a feeder, and then grab a mason jar, and there's already a 1-to-1 mixture with Pro Health in it. So grab a jar and a feeder. They're for you. I didn't poke the holes in the top, obviously, when you're traveling with it. So 3 small holes in the top. Turn it over before you get to your hive.
What size holes, Al? What size is the?
Thumbtack.
Thumbtack.
Thumbtack size.
When are you gonna raffle off?
All right. What's that?
When are you gonna raffle off that one?
It's in my yard. Some people might have seen it sitting in my yard right next to the pond. It doesn't look like that anymore. It's rotting. I haven't used it. If somebody wants to refurbish it, they're welcome to it. That thing ended up costing me, it was like $800, because with the solar panels, the battery, the pump was expensive. The pump was, then the float switch inside.
Did you have fun?
I did. It was well worth the $800.